Hello YouTube and welcome back to a new video with me, Rams fan White. Well, the rambling groundhopper, I need to get it right with a rebrand, so taking a bit of a while to get used to. And we're back with the weekly predictions, series 3, third year season, doing these weekly predictions. It seems to have a core base of people who really like them, so I'm going to carry them on for now at least. And we'll see how they go. Today we're doing the EFL Cup First Round. UEFA Super Cup's also happening this weekend, as well as the FA Cup Extra Preliminary Round and the opening day of the National League North, South, and the National League itself. So I'll do the FA Cup ones at the end because I'll probably do about 60% of the ties. It's way too long to go through like all 200 odd fixtures in one sitting. Especially seeing I'm going to be recording a live stream tonight, so I need to save my voice for the live watch along. So we'll start off. I am aware that I missed out Bristol City versus Warsaw last night. Congratulations, Warsaw, on your 1-0 win. It was a very tense game, I think it's fair to say, but I think the Saddlers certainly were the plucky underdogs who won, so I think everyone's a little bit happy about that. So we'll start off with tonight's games, which see Wolverhampton Wanderers versus Port Vale, which is a bit of a local derby of sorts. You know, it's not going to be the one which everyone talks about, you know, the likes of West Brom versus Wolves, which is the major one. But, you know, there is also Port Vale versus Burton, I think is quite a big one, and Port Vale v Stoke. But there is a rivalry in here. You know, they're both in the West Midlands. They're both not far away from each other. And I do think Wolves probably come away with a fairly comfortable win. They're bang on favourites for a lot of people to make an instant return to the Premier League. I think they're going to have to win out 3-0 winners. I know Port Vale had a good run in some of the cup competitions last season, but I just don't think they're going to replicate it this time round. Wycombe Wanderers versus Stevenage. I think you can see that both of these two teams will probably be having aspirations for playoffs this season, with Stevenage reaching the playoffs last time round and Wycombe, I've actually tipped to win the title this time round. But it's also a bit of a local rivalry as well. But in terms of on the performance, it is a cup competition. I'm just going to have to back Wycombe Wanderers to a 3-1 win, I think. Middlesbrough versus Wrexham, which is what we're doing as the live watch along tonight. Two teams who will be aiming for at least the playoffs, if not automatic promotion. You know, Boris had a lot of money put into recently due to selling Hackney and getting that sell-on clause for Morgan Rogers, so about £50 million in the bank, which they can reinvest amongst that squad. Whereas Wrexham obviously have their Ryan Reynolds and money behind them. I think it could be a quite tense game, this one. I've gone with a 1-1 draw, and it does go straight to penalties, of course, this competition, which I just think Middlesbrough have slightly more sharper shooting. So I'm going to go with a win on penalties for Borough there from the spot. Cambridge United versus Barnet. Cambridge made a return to League One last season. And taking on Barnet, though, it's not going to be an easy task. You know, I think Barnet could reach the playoffs this season, and I think they're going to be right up for the cup competition. So I've gone 0-0. I've gone Cambridge United, though, to win on penalties. But it's going to be a bit of a gruelling watch, probably. Queen's Park Rangers versus Millwall in an all-London affair. I think Millwall have to run out with winners of this one. I just don't see QPR progressing. 2-1 to Millwall. AFC Wimbledon versus Newport County. Well, both of these have had cheeky cup runs in the past in this competition in relatively recent years as well, and you can always back one of these ones to go deep into competition, maybe knocking out a Premier League team or so. So I think they're both going to take it seriously. A 2-2 draw. I think Newport County, though, win it on penalties. I think they do need the finances a little bit more than AFC Wimbledon do, as they would be looking to mount a survival bid, and there's not a lot of cash in the coffers at the moment. So a good cup run could certainly buoy them up a bit. Barnsley versus Wigan Athletic. Just a bit of a dull League One game, isn't it? A 1-1 draw I've gone with Wigan Athletic to win the penalties. Nothing much to write home about in this one. Bradford City versus Rochdale. I think, Rochdale back in the EFL, so back in the League Cup. I think it was a penalty shootout win over Tranmere Rovers after a 2-2 draw, if I'm right, in their preliminary round. They have a couple of games that, for reasons because of Europe, basically, to keep it level. I think Rochdale do win this one. I think they're a very good team, and obviously Bradford did reach for playoffs last season, so maybe slightly focused on that competition. I do, though, think Bradford City take up competitions fairly seriously. I remember watching Derby play them in the EFL Trophy in a very soulless Pride Park. It was only about, about 9,000 of us there, and all sat on sort of one side. It was just very odd and a scrappy and horrible game. But 2-1 to Rochdale. We could see Rochdale go a bit further in this competition. Now they're back. Bristol Rovers versus Peterborough United. I think we see another upset in this one. I think Bristol Rovers run out 3-1 winners, and I know a lot of people are unhappy with me in the comment section of my League Two predictions with how low I put Bristol Rovers, but I think, in fairness, it's a very competitive League Two, and I think Peterborough are at some point potentially going to end up slipping in there if they're not careful. Bromley versus Reading, a really difficult one because I really like Bromley, especially in their FA Cup exploits a couple of seasons back with the likes of Michael Cheek and Danny Imre. Obviously, Imre no longer there, but Cheek still is, and I just think it's going to be a high-scoring 3-3 draw. I think this is going to be ending up a game that is going to be exciting in the league as well this season with Bromley League One debutants. Reading, I think, will win on penalties, though. A very big team historically. Sort of hit a bit of a rock, though, at the moment. Burnley versus Notts County. It's quite interesting that these two teams haven't played each other for, nearly over 20 years now. Whereas both of these two teams were founding members of the Football League. It's just that Notts County had been in a downward spiral down from National League, now building back. They're back in League One. I still think it's a step too far, though, to take on and knock out Burnley, who will probably feel their reserves, but even so, a 2-1 win for Burnley. We know that a lot of teams are taking this as just another pre-season friendly due to the time of year it is. Burton Albion versus Blackburn Rovers. And you know what? I quite like Burton's competitiveness in this cup particularly. It wasn't that long ago they got to the semi-finals and, played against Manchester City. Had a great home leg and then got battered in the away leg. And it was just like, what is Burton even doing at that stage of a competition? So I think Blackburn need to be careful. I think it goes to a 1-1 draw, but I don't think Burton have got the squad depth to make the desired changes. And I think Blackburn do run out as the winners on penalties as a result. But you never know. I think Burton are a team which are always likely to cause an upset. Cardiff City versus Swindon Town. A little bit of a local rivalry of such. Cardiff back in the Championship where they belong. I think Swindon will be expecting at some point to reach the playoffs of the League Two and try and get a promotion to League One. Obviously, they were back in the Premier League. We are talking over 25 years ago, though, now. I think Cardiff City do run out 2-1 winners in this one. I don't think Swindon win. Crewe Alexandra versus Accrington Stanley. It's not a game that I think many people will be attending. I don't think it's the most likely to get you on the edge of your seat. 2-0 to Crewe, which is its home advantage. We'll go with that. Could go either way, though. Derby County versus Lincoln City. I don't think either of our two sides have had a great pre-season, with Lincoln City losing by 5 goals up against Grimsby, who are now a couple of leagues below them. And I think Lincoln will be having a bit of a tough ride in the Championship this year. The predictions for the Championship will be coming out. I've gone slightly crazy with some of them, so do have patience with me of that. But I think Derby need to get up a gear, and maybe a professionalised fixture like this will result in that, because I think we do have a quality to do better than we have done this pre-season. I just think everyone is still a bit lackadaisical on the beach during pre-season, and now we're here. Get your head in the game. I've gone 3-1 to Derby County. I think we could I'd like a cup run. We haven't had a cup run in a while, and that's a shame. It really is, because a cup run is just something that gets clubs a bit more excited. Fleetwood Town versus Chesterfield. I think Chesterfield might be more focused on the league at this point, trying to get a return to League One after many years away. I have gone with a 1-1 draw, and I've gone Fleetwood Town to win on penalties, but I don't think Chesterfield will care too much to be dumped out of the EFL Cup so early. It is what it is. They'll be focused on the league. Gillingham versus Luton Town. I expect Luton Town should be getting up for a competition in the Cup. Certainly a team that I think has a potential to go quite far in it. I think they will be combative. I think they will want to make lives difficult for the teams who come up against them. And I think, they did do exceptionally well in the EFL Trophy last season. So clearly do take cup competitions fairly seriously. So I've gone 3-1 to Luton Town. Grimsby Town versus Blackpool. I have gone with a 0-0 draw because I think Grimsby, if we remember this time last year, well, it wasn't quite this time last year, it was later round, but they knocked out Manchester United in the same competition. Shocked a lot of people, and I think, are we going to see another run? I don't know. I've got a 0-0 draw, and I have gone Blackpool to win. But I would like it if Grimsby do go on another run. But in a battle of which coastal town is more knackered, it'll be an interesting one. Leicester City versus Northampton Town, a local rivalry of sorts. It's not too far between these two clubs, just down the road from each other. And also the fact that both of these two teams were relegated last season. I think Leicester feel their second team 100%. And I think Northampton just don't have the firepower at their disposal. I've got 0-0 draw, and Leicester probably to win on the penalty shootout. Leyton Orient versus Oxford United. Leyton Orient were almost relegated last season. Oxford were, so they are now in the same division. I just don't see Oxford losing this. I've gone 3-2 to Oxford United. A bit of an excited game at Brisbane Road, maybe. But yeah, not the one which will a lot of people be tuning into, I imagine. Norwich City versus MK Dons. And I can tell you now, MK Dons have got a fantastic team. And I think Norwich City, I don't think they're really bothered about the League Cup. Considering how they just fell short of the playoffs last season, they'll be trying, I think, to get themselves focused on the league, which always is a bit of a negligence, which I don't think is actually pays off. I've gone 4-0 to MK Dons. Maybe one of the biggest upsets of the afternoon. Preston North End versus Huddersfield Town. Yorkshire versus Lancashire at Deepdale Stadium. Huddersfield are having a right old torrid time at the moment, and I think Preston, they're a bit average, but as a result, they can probably afford a cup run. 4-1 Preston North End in the first round here. Salford City versus Shrewsbury Town. I just don't think Salford are really going to take this one overly seriously. Oh well, sorry, that was my mic. I think we're completely fine. Just checking. 1 2 1 2. Yeah, we're fine. So I think we're going to go with 2-1 to Shrewsbury Town in this one. I think we're just going to see Salford probably field a bit of a weaker team. I know they did all right in one of the cups, didn't they? They played against Man City and they got dumped out. It was a respectable 2-0 though. So yeah, Bolton Wanderers versus Sheffield Wednesday. These two teams passed each other this season. Bolton going up, Sheffield Wednesday going down. Good preparation, I think, for Sheffield Wednesday coming into this season. At the moment, they're a club that need a bit of a rebuild. So having a cup run provides a couple of extra fixtures maybe needed to try out some new formations, what would be able to suit League One, because the football is very different. I have gone 1-1 draw, and I've gone Sheffield Wednesday to win on penalties. Finally, to actually get through in a competition, which, how bad they were last season, which, wasn't no part due to the team, but more of an off the field situation. I think it would be quite good for Sheffield Wednesday to have a good cup run. Stockport County versus Doncaster Rovers. I think Stockport County want to start their season with a bit of a bang. I've gone 4-2 to County. They're at home as well at Edgeley Park. I just think we're going to see Stockport County maybe go on a cheeky cup run. I know they loved the EFL trophy last season, so they're clearly not someone who takes cup competitions as sort of just a training exercise. Stoke City versus Oldham Athletic. If we're talking back in the day, both of these two teams would have been stalwarts in the Premier League in the early 2000s with the likes of Rory Delap. But yeah, I think now, I don't think either side would win, to be honest. I think Oldham Athletic probably progress on penalties after a 0-0 draw, a bit of a dull one at the Bait 365. Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, really, because Stoke at one point did take this cup competition quite seriously. Swansea City versus Birmingham City. We saw Birmingham as a live watch-along in this competition last season against Sheffield United, and I can't remember, one of the teams did turn up, and I think it was Sheffield United. I've gone a 1-1 draw, and I've gone Birmingham to win on penalties. I think it could really go either way this game. I don't really see either team necessarily fielding their strongest 11. Watford versus Crawley Town. I think this is the first time these two teams are actually playing each other, which would be quite interesting. I just think Crawley will drag out a result here. They're in a bit of a financial mire themselves. So I've got a 0-0 draw with Watford to win on penalties. But if Crawley do get something, I would not be too surprised. West Ham United are back in the Championship. It's been a very long time since, I think it was 2016-17 they were in it. It's almost a decade. I'm up against Portsmouth, who have had their fair share of good FA Cup upsets in the past. Won immediately after World War II, they won the FA Cup, and then it was 2010, I think, as well. They won it. West Ham won the European Cup in the 1960s. I can't remember which one that one was, but tend to be a bit underwhelming in cup competitions. But I've gone them to win 4-3 to the Hammers at home. It'll be an exciting game, I will say that. Cheltenham Town versus Charlton Athletic. I think Charlton easily run out winners here. I think 3-1 winners. They need a constant confidence boost to start the season on a high. And up against Cheltenham, it's very much possible, with Cheltenham, I think, likely to be involved in a relegation battle this season. They just probably don't have a squad to focus on this competition. Colchester United versus Southampton. It's going to be a relatively routine 2-0 win for the Saints. Nothing too fancy to talk about here. Rotherham United versus West Bromwich Albion. A bit of a similar one for the Baggies in this one. I think 2-0 to West Brom. We're just going to look at a team that overall, I think, are just a better package. Although I think they went out when Derby played them in the EFL Cup. It's a couple of seasons back now, I think, on a Tuesday night. Right, let's go into the National League games for a while, the opening day of the fixtures, which always throw up a bit of results, but they're a bit, well, I don't know, a bit sort of, you can never quite tell who's going to win on the opening day. You don't really look at pre-seasons too much coming into it, and I think Southend might start a bit disappointing. I think they're going to be a strong team, don't get me wrong, but it could be that they just suffer a 1-0 shock defeat to Altrincham, who, just because they've come out of the blocks a bit quicker, I think that's a bit more likely to happen, to be honest. Boreham Wood versus Tamworth. Boreham Wood should be in a bit of a similar boat to Southend, actually. I think they should be even arguably aiming for the title. I think this is arguably the most open that we will have seen the National League. I think York and Rochdale were overwhelming favourites last season, and I think teams like Forest Green Rovers and Southend will both be going for it, as well as Carlisle. And I think Bournemouth are in that mix now. I think Tamworth could even have an outside shout. I don't think either Barrow or Harrogate are the strongest teams, and neither do I think Hornchurch or Worthing, particularly coming up, will cause too much bother. I've gone 2-1 Tamworth. I've cheekily said that in a couple of seasons' time they could well be in the playoffs, and I do stand by that. They're a strong team. Boston United versus Aldershot Town. Boston this week confirming the signing of Lennon Wheeldon, who I think was excellent with South Shields last season, and I thought had a great spell in glimpses with Derby County as well. So I wish the guy the best of luck in his career. In this one, a lot of people are saying Boston to be dark horses this season. I just don't quite see it myself. And I do think that Aldershot Town went out 2-0 winners away to Boston here. I could be wrong. I could really be wrong, but Aldershot need to start this season much more brightly than they have previously, because they've been a bit stuck recently. Carlisle United versus Worthing, a long trip for Worthing on the opening day, isn't it? All the way up to Carlisle. But I think get that sort of fixture nice and early out of the way, because it's a long trip and it's against a team that a lot of people expect you to be battered against. But I like what Worthing have done so far. I really have. I think Adam Hinshelwood is a great manager at this level. I think you look what he did with York. I think we can see Worthing not going to be a particularly easy team to beat. I've gone with a 0-0 draw. Carlisle are a bit in flux at the moment after getting rid of Mark Hughes. It's going to be a bit of an early test this season for Rob Elliott, who comes across from Gateshead, and I think he did a good job with keeping Gateshead alive, but I think he's a bit of a downgrade from Mark Hughes, to be honest. It was an odd move, to say the least. Eastleigh versus Gateshead. Talking about Gateshead, I suspect they start a bit better. I know the circumstances surrounding that club is a bit iffy at the moment, but I think they've got to take some form going from how well they ended last season, and even they've got a different man in the dugout in Lee Catamole now. I think that self-belief has got to be there, and I thought we saw glimpses of them in their pre-season friend against Newcastle, that they were really resilient in defence and really strong, and actually, almost beat Newcastle, who were recently playing Barcelona in the Champions League. So not a bad performance from them in that snapshot of pre-season. And I did say that Eastleigh are quite likely to be relegated. So I've gone 2-0 to Gateshead. A great start for the Heed. I know it's a long trip down to the Silver Lake Stadium, but it's just going to be one of them things that Gateshead have got to start. They've got an easier fixture, so they've got to start well. Forest Green Rovers versus FC Halifax Town. I mean, both of these two teams will probably argue that they should be aiming to the playoffs. I think Halifax have been overachieving for the last couple of years, though, and John McGrath is taking that step up from Buxton to the National League. So it will take him a bit of time to adjust to the more professional outfits in this level. And Robbie Savage is a very acute manager. And obviously, Buxton played up against Macclesfield before, I think, when Robbie Savage was manager. I can't remember, though, at what point he left. But, yeah, I think Forest Green Rovers will run out winners in this one. 2-1. They should be arguably challenging for the top three this season. I think any less would be a bit of a disappointment. AFC Fylde versus Wealdstone. A good winning run for AFC Fylde last season. If they take that into the start of this season, I think they could have a good start to the season. I think Wealdstone are one of them teams that we don't really know where they're at the moment. because I can't see them being higher than a mid-table outfit. So I've gone AFC Fylde to win 2-0, taking that winning momentum and continuing to progress. Harrogate Town versus Solihull Moors. Harrogate in a bit of that opposite situation where they lost a lot of games, and I think Simon Weaver's got to do something to get his boys up for the National League, because it's a hard league, and I think Solihull Moors is a good acid test, that litmus test that you have up against a team that is sort of middle of the road National League. I've gone 2-2 in this one. I don't really know who's going to win and who's going to turn up, to be honest. Hartlepool United versus Barrow. Hartlepool have had a fantastic pre-season as Lee Clark. And, every single time I've been talking about them in the non-league show, they've been absolutely phenomenal. And maybe I was a little bit harsh in the predictions for Hartlepool because I didn't really rate Lee Clark, but clearly he's getting the team clicking in a certain way. And I did think that Barrow was going to be relegated, so I have to go with a 3-1 Hartlepool win in the opening game of the season. Hornchurch versus Kidderminster Harriers. Both of these two teams got through their respective playoffs to get here. It's going to be really difficult to pick a winner. So I've gone 0-0 draw. Hornchurch could probably get a lot of draws this season. I think they're particularly one of them ones that if they keep it tight at the back, they could be a decent enough outfit, but I do worry for them. I really do. Scunthorpe United versus Yeovil Town. These two teams, at one point played in championship. Now they're, struggling in the National League, and Yeovil, I think, are even struggling to stay in this league. Scunthorpe, they're on a bit of a upward momentum, though. They've had their time in National League North, got to playoffs last season. Would be a good, strong outfit this time round. Yeah, I'm going to go 1-0 win Scunthorpe United at home. A win's a win, 3 belts under the belt at the start of the season. It's going to be it's not going to be a pretty game, but it's a game which is needed to happen. Woking versus Sutton United. A bit of a local rivalry already in this one, and I think both of these two teams are quite average, to be honest. And we saw that Jermaine Defoe situation at Woking, where he just left the club inexplicably. And so far, so they're going to be starting the season with the interim managers of Jake Hyde and Craig Ross are Woking. It's going to be very difficult for them to sustain any form that they've had previously with such uncertainty. And especially with Chris Laguta, I think, has built a solid enough squad here, actually, at Sutton. There's been a couple of good signings made, I think. So I've gone with a 1-1 draw in this one. But I think Sutton are slightly more likely to edge out a victory. AFC Telford United versus Brackley Town into the National League North, and Brackley return immediately back to the National League North. And it's probably not too surprising those times, though, I thought Brackley were decent, but then they lost Cohen to Shrewsbury. And I think since that point, had sort of floated and flatlined into relegation. So it'll be an interesting test if they can make that return to the National League. I think they do start strongly here. I don't know if they immediately bounce back, but I think a 1-0 win for Brackley would probably be about a fair enough summation of where the two teams are at the moment. Buxton versus Hereford. A McGrath-less Buxton might prove a bit weaker, and I think Hereford this season will be stronger than they were last time around. I think it was underwhelming from the Bulls last season to be in that relegation mix. I've gone 2-1 to Hereford. I think we're looking at a team here that should be stronger. Chorley versus Chester. Chorley are a weird team that they were for years competing in the National League North playoffs, and now sort of suddenly ended up going into mid-table. But I think Chester as well, they're a team that underachieved considering their budget that they have and how much they back their manager. I've gone 3-0 to Chorley, which it's probably a bit of a mad call, but if they do better this season than they did last season, I can see that being a bit of a reality. Darlington versus Worksop Town. I think Worksop end up in a relegation battle. I really do. Maybe even relegated. And Darlington, we know what sort of team they are. They're the ones which will knock on the door. They'll huff and puff, but they won't get in into the National League North playoffs. But they do start well. And I'm going to go 5-1 to Darlington. And a bit of a 5-star display from the Quakers. Hebburn Town versus Southport. It'll be interesting to see how Hebburn adjust. It's the highest they've ever played. They've had a lot of promotions recently, and a team that is a bit of an unknown quantity coming into this level. I've got a 0-0 draw. I think they could probably draw out something up against Southport. Interesting story. I went to Hebburn at one point on the last day of the season. It was a couple of seasons ago now. I actually went to them also, ironically enough, on my last day of the season. This season just gone by to see their title lift in a very tense game where it was a three-way race, really. But this was one of the season before that, where it wasn't much of a game which was riding on it. But anyway, it was also the National League North last day. There was Southport versus South Shields. And Southport had just finished the campaign a bit abjectly, but made sure that South Shields wouldn't get into the playoffs with the result. And so I bumped into this massive crowd of Southport fans, all banging on the roofs and Southport, ole, 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 sort of chants, And one of them was actually been on the BBC for, he was a Brighton fan as well. He was with Brighton versus Roma. We were stabbed by one of the Roma fans at the game, so it ended up on the BBC. So it was a bit of a mad one, really. We just got talking about football and Southport. And we had this sort of Boston fan with us as well, and they were sort of because Boston had sort of taken the place, I think, of South Shields, and therefore South Shields couldn't make it, and Boston duly got promoted that season as well, which was slightly ironic. So yeah, I think in terms of my memories of being at Hebburn, coming back from when seeing Southport and the Metro fans on the Metro there, so 0-0 draw, happy memory. But maybe Southport fans won't be as happy as they pass Hebburn at this time round. Kings Lynn Town versus Harbour Town. Harbour have proven themselves able to compete against some other teams in this level. Kings Lynn are an odd one because they're actually not that far from Harbour, but have never played each other. And I think they just upgraded each other in terms of in that level on the pyramid. As I think it's going to be another 0-0 draw. I'm going to go with. I think it's going to be a bit of a scrappy one. I think it's going to be one of them opening games of the season that just doesn't get anywhere and feels just a bit unnecessarily physical. Marine versus Macclesfield. I think a lot of people will be tipping Macclesfield to get the title this season in National League North. I'm not so confident, but I think they do get at least solid playoffs. They should beat Marine, who I think haven't ever really started seasons amazingly. They sort of have a upward trajectory mid-season and then sort of flatline again afterwards. It's sort of almost like a bell curve sort of thing. I've got a 4-2 to Macclesfield over in Liverpool. But yeah, I think only a forward back against Macclesfield in this fixture. Merthyr Town versus Hensford Town. Hensford Town is an interesting one. They used to be in the Conference North a very long time ago now. We're talking over a decade, but they got very decent facilities, and I think they're a good setup at this level. And I've gotten for them to win in their opening game against Merthyr Town, which a lot of travelling is involved. I mean, it's not as bad this one because it's they're not that far from each other. I've gone 2-0 to Hensford here. But 2-1 to Hensford. It's going to be one of them ones that I think they do all right. I think they get a bit of an average finish, but no more than that. Both of these two teams. Morecambe versus Spennymoor Town. Well, Morecambe are in free fall a bit at the moment, and maybe being in National League North will be a good recovery time. But we're hoping not to go back to the Northern Premier League where they were in the 1980s. It was the last time they were that low, when there wasn't even a Conference North to talk about, because that was formed in 2004. I think Spennymoor is a tough test. I really do think Spennymoor are one of them teams that they are sort of just about not good enough to be in the playoffs, but they are. You can guarantee they'll be competitive towards that end of the table, looking like they might poke their head in. But Morecambe should win this league, and a team against Spennymoor, they should be winning. I think they go from 2-0 down to come back to win 3-2. There you go. That's my prediction in this one. Oxford City versus Bedford Town, two of the more southern-based teams in the National League North. It feels ridiculous for either of these teams are really in the north, so to speak. I think both of these two teams do struggle this season. It's a tough old league. I've gone 2-1 to Bedford, away from home, but I just see someone has to win this game. Nice early 3 points will do both of these two teams a world of good. Radcliffe versus Spalding United. I think Radcliffe are a bit of an average team at this level. Maybe they can kick on to prove me wrong and get playoffs. I don't think they were the best team up against Bury in that pre-season friendly I talked about in the non-league show. I think Spalding also, in their cup exploits recently, have proven themselves a good enough team. I've got a 0-0 draw in this one. I'm excited to see what both Spalding can pull up this season. Scarborough Athletic versus South Shields. An interesting one. Two northeastern-based teams. I wouldn't say necessarily a derby day because there's still a bit of a difference between them. I think South Shields maybe having a bit of disappointment hangover. Scarborough were a strong team last season as well. 2-2 draw in this one. The points shared and already denting South Shields, which should finish in the playoffs. But they may be one of them teams that we'll see how long the hangover lasts, because there will be a disappointment hangover. That I can't say any less than that, because I do think it's going to be one of them ones that it is just going to be, isn't it? It's just going to be a bit like that. On to the National League South and Billericay Town versus Dover Athletic. Well, when I first started this channel about 6 years ago now, these two teams were in the National League South, but both of these two teams since have been mainly in the Isthmian League. I think Dover Athletic run out winners. I think Billericay are going to struggle and might go straight back down, to be honest. I've gone 2-1 to Dover Athletic. Hopefully they do a bit better than last season, where they were never looked in danger of relegation, but partly because of how dire the other teams in the relegation zone were. And I think in a more competitive environment, they might struggle. Braintree Town versus Tunbridge Angels. Well, Braintree were under a transfer embargo and then came out of it due to that sell-on clause in Lisby of 12.5% of their World Cup player, I can't remember the name of now, but playing for New Zealand. That gave them a healthy 400 grand and took them out of the embargo. But I think a lot of people should be expecting Braintree, with the squad they have, to at least compete in the playoffs come the end of the season. Tunbridge Angels I just don't see doing overly that well. I've got 1-0 to Braintree Town. A nice early start to the season for the Essex-based side. Dorking Wanderers versus Dagenham and Redbridge. Both of these two teams will probably fancy themselves for the title. But I think it's going to be one of them ones that it's just going to be a disappointingly dull 0-0 draw when it should really be an exciting end-to-end game. Farnham Town versus AFC Towton. Towton I think might be our dark horse to get into the playoffs this season. Now Farnham will be having an interesting test because they've gone and shot up through the league. It wasn't that long ago I was talking about this team being, I think it was a combined counties league or something, when I first started the channel, and they've just monumentally shot up through the levels. I've gone 2-1 to Totem because I think that they might shock a few people this time round. Folkestone Invicta versus Walton and Hersham. I think this is going to be the most exciting opening fixture of the season. I've gone 6-0 to Invicta. I think Folkestone have the ability. A lot of fans attend Folkestone games as well, around about 700. So a decent fan base that cheer them on. But yeah, 6-0 to Folkestone Invicta. I think Walton and Hersham have done all right in a few other cup runs, probably get mid-table or so. I think both of these two teams roughly finish in a similar position. Hemel Hempstead Town versus Chelmsford City. The Tudors, even though they've lost Ian Allenson, who went to Dagenham and Redbridge, will still be hoping that they can overperform with Lee Bircham and get another season in the playoffs. I don't suspect it happens. In fact, I think they might rather be struggling on the other end of the table because I think they definitely overperformed last season and just don't have capacity to continue performing that level. But I think also Chelmsford City are underperforming at the moment, and I think they're in danger of sort of losing their way a bit. And I've gone 2-1 to the Tudors at the moment. I think we're still seeing a bit of a crest of a wave being rode by the Tudors, so we'll go with that for now. Maidstone United versus Farnborough. I think Maidstone should be backing themselves for at least playoffs, and Farnborough will just be content to stay up come the end of the season at this point. 1-0 to Maidstone. Can't see Farnborough getting anything from this game. Salisbury versus Hampton and Richmond Borough. Both of these two teams are going to be bottom half relegation fighting, 1-1 draw. It's not really good. If anyone does win this one, I think you'd already be tipping them to being more likely to stay up. Slough Town versus Ebbsfleet United is not going ahead, so we don't need to talk about that one, but it will be addressed in the non-league show about the situation at Ebbsfleet, I'm sure of it. But yeah, they've been suspended for the opening 3 games while they sort out their HMRC problems. So hopefully they get that resolved. But yeah, at the moment, not looking good for the Fleet. Torquay United versus Horsham. Torquay should be challenging for the title. They're far too big for this level. But they sort of almost have that arrogance, which means that they don't ever actually quite get there. But I've gone 2-0 to Torquay. It's a fairly easy prediction to make, isn't it? You can always back on Torquay more times than not getting into the playoffs. Truro City versus Maidenhead United. I think Truro need a bit of a levelling out season. I just don't think they're going to make that instant impact. And Maidenhead are a hard team to beat. You know, they'll be hoping for the playoffs again. I've gone 3-0 to Maidenhead in this one. Away, all the way down in Truro. Quite a far trip to go, I know. But yeah, it should be for Maidenhead a relatively routine win. Weston-super-Mare versus Chesham United. I was really impressed with Weston-super-Mare last season, and I think Chesham could impress me. They have the capacity to, but they need more fans to come, and that's what's holding them back. So if you're in the Chesham area, go and support your local team. You know, they're a good old bunch. I mean, I'm sure of that, and you know, it's vastly needed at that level. The fan base revenue. I got 1-0 Weston-super-Mare though. As they start their season very well. A couple of the other EFL Cup games got Mansfield Town versus Sheffield United. Love a bit of a transfer business that Mansfield have done, bringing in David McGoldrick and Liam Thompson, particularly. It's 2 great players who used to play for Derby. And I talked a lot about Nigel Clough's men and how they're actually capable of competing for the playoffs in a couple of seasons' time. But I think a test against Sheffield United, I mean, Sheffield United have got something to prove this season that they aren't going to, because a lot of people are talking about online, and I know they are, about how they could be in trouble without parachute payments and in for a financial reckoning. And It could be the case, but a good cup run will prove a lot of doubters wrong. I've gone 1-0 Sheffield United, which won't prove any doubters wrong. They're expected to win this one, but it keeps them in the cup competition. Draw out a hat, a decent team. Even Sheffield Wednesday would be a rivalry, which would be good to see in one of the cups, wouldn't it? Plymouth Argyle versus Exeter City. Talking about rivalries which aren't going to happen this season in the league, is Plymouth versus Exeter in the Devon Derby. Both of these two teams will be determined not to lose. I've gone 2-2 in this one, but Plymouth Argyle will be the team to win on penalties. I just think that gulf in the leagues will eventually show through, and Exeter were a bit poor last season, but I think it could really go either way. You've got the UEFA Super Cup, PSG versus Aston Villa. It always goes to a Champions League winner. This game is like a literally useless fixture. I don't even know why they have it. I've gone 3-1 to PSG. So let's focus on some of these FA Cup fixtures, shall we? And we're going to start with the oldest football club in the world, Sheffield Football Club. I think it's right that we include them. They're formed in 1857. They, in terms of the FA Cup, have reached the fourth round all the way in the very early days of the FA Cup. Haven't really. They were runners-up in the FA Vase in 1976-77. In terms of more recent history, I think we're talking about a team that haven't really progressed that deep into a competition. I think the last season they got knocked out in a preliminary round, and then they got knocked out in the second qualifying round when they were Northern Prem. I think really the last decent run came in 2010-11 when they reached the fourth qualifying round. But yeah, not a great run, but they're up against a Parkgate team that they reached the second qualifying round back in the 1990s and a couple of times, but I don't think we've ever really talked about Parkgate as a team that, they'll be a good FA Cup team. Like, I just don't see it. So yeah, I've gone with a 3-2 win to Sheffield in this one. We'll talk about Lytown versus Stone Old Alleghenians. Lytown, one of them Midlands-based teams, one of them ones that have reached the third qualifying round. It was back 3 times in the 1980s. I think really we're talking about that being the only real bit of note. I don't think they're a team that massively impressed with mid-table in the Midland League last season. Stone Old Alleghenians were also mid-table, so it'll be just interesting to see that they've only ever reached. The furthest they reached was the second qualifying round. I just think one of these two teams potentially goes on a good run this season, is what I will say. I've gone 4-0 to Lytown. I think it's going to be quite a triumphant win. Romulus versus Highgate United, a local rivalry, a Birmingham rivalry at that. With Romulus, they're a team that Price met the second qualifying round. They were in the Southern League Division 1 Midlands at one point in time. They were Midland League Cup finalists last season as well. So it's sort of, I spent a lot of time at step 4. So maybe should be playing a bit higher. Highgate United almost were relegated last season. Compare that to where they were, in 2020-24, where they were in the playoffs of the Midland League. They've had a pretty rough ride of thing, but they have reached also the semi-finals of the FA Amateur Cup and reached the fourth qualifying round of the FA Cup in 1973-74. A little bit of a, FA Cup heritage in that. So, in that regards, I think we should be seeing an interesting game. I've gone 2-0 to Romulus. Dudley Town versus Droitwich Spa. Yeah, Dudley is a team which has been competing probably to potentially get into Tier 8 for the last couple of seasons. You know, they've been on an upward trajectory in 2022-23. In 2022-23, they were got promoted to this level of Tier 9. They've just been a club in an upward trajectory, to be honest. They reached the first round proper of the FA Cup in 1976-77. So for a team to reach the first round of the FA Cup, it's not too bad. And they've also been in the Southern League Premier Division. So, I mean, Billy Wright actually turned on the floodlights of the club. It's, a team which was historically a very big team, probably refinding their feet, and I think they will reach them heights one day again. Droitwich Spa, also another team which is on the rise. Kevin Keegan actually opened their ground in 2022. May him rest in peace. And yeah, I think third in the Hellenic League last season, having been Division 1 champions 24-25. They've never had a good FA Cup run. Last season was their first ever one, and they were knocked out in the first extra preliminary round. But this is a team, you got Quinton Townsend in the team, who used to play for Hereford and Wolverhampton Wanderers. So a good player in that regard. I've gone 4-2 to Droitwich Spa. We'll go with them to have up their FA Cup run and maybe actually be something to write home about. Hackney Wick versus West Essex. Yeah, we are skipping some if you have just joined us. Hackney Wick, bit of a mid-table team. There isn't much in regards to say about them. They reached the second qualifying round last season, though, had a decent sort of run, but they've been nothing more than really a, at best, Essex Senior League team. So it'll be interesting if they can just sort of progress onwards. West Essex almost were relegated last season. They finished just above it, but they've never been good at the FA Cup. So I think one of these two teams has to prove me wrong this season and actually go on a decent run and prove a lot of doubters wrong. They've gone 2-1 to Hackney Wick. I think if they have another good FA Cup run, continue to grow as a club. Enfield versus Welwyn Garden City. Enfield, truly a historic club, and find themselves in Tier 9 shamefully, having been promoted from the Southern League Division 1 Central last season. Because they, in 1980-81, reached the fourth round of the FA Cup. They twice won the FA Trophy in the 1980s as well. They were twice as well winners of the FA Amateur Cup. They actually even won the European Amateur Cup Winners' Cup. Twice won the conference in the 1980s. Numerous times won the Isthmian League. I could go on. This is one of the most truly historic non-league teams of all time. I think, they drew actually against Barnsley in that fourth round as well, only to lose 3-0 in the replay. But if you look, it was such a historic thing. They got past Hereford United in the second round, who were in the Football League at the time, I think it was. They then drew against Port Vale to win the home leg 3-0. And then they drew 1-1 at Barnsley's ground to then only lose at home. So a truly historic run in that 1980 edition of the FA Cup. And, up against a Welwyn Garden City, they should be beating such a team. But actually saying that, Welwyn Garden City are now the league above them, and they almost reached the playoffs last season of the Southern League Division 1 Central. So it's a bit of a shame, really. Their highest they've gone in the cup is the third qualifying round in 1998-99. nothing really where, I'd say, well, they've been a great team. I mean, it is one of them ones, isn't it, that they should really be doing better in the cup competitions, maybe. But yeah, I think Welling Garden City, maybe it's time for them to have their run. Maybe we've gone 4-2 to Welling Garden City. I think I wanted to talk about Enfield and the disappointment that they've had over a number of years now. Hartpury versus Cirencester Town. Hartpury are a club on the rise at the moment, and like really on the rise. And yeah, for them, this will be a very interesting thing. They were only founded in 2020 as Hartpury University and then changed their name in 2025. But they have had a phenomenal success rate. They reached the semi-finals of the FA Vars in 2024-25. In 2023-24, they were promoted from a Hellenic League Division 1 and then achieved back-to-back promotions. And last season finished just outside the Southern League Division 1 South in 7th. For a team that is like a university team, let's not try and make this what it isn't. How on earth have they managed to get so high up the ladder that they are almost in Tier 7? It's not even a big university. So I think it's very impressive. I will say that. I think it's very, very impressive. Cirencester look like they are going to get into the Southern League at some point. They were in the playoffs last season. They reached twice the fourth qualifying round of the FA Cup as well, so not too bad in that regard. I mean, even they may not even have been the team that they were, a decade ago when they were Southern League Division 1 South and West champions. And they've been a sort of team that I think Tier 8 probably. So it may be a bit of a disappointment that they're as low as they are. It's sort of two clubs going in opposite directions. Two ships passing each other at night. And I think Hartpury will run out as 1-0 winners in this one. Cribs versus Fairford Town. And Cribs almost were relegated last season. And in a sense, they're a bit of a joke club. They won the Hellenic League in 2022-23. Furthest they've gone was also in 23-24 in the FA Cup to the second qualifying round. But I think I'm not a huge fan of the club. It's basically a shopping centre if you don't know what Cribs is. They were known as the Sun Life Assurance Football Club when Sun Life were placed in Bristol. And so it's just been like, it's a bit of an odd one. It's one of the few working teams left, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, they're lucky to still be in the FA Cup, having been, I think it was maybe a reprisal, see them not relegated last season. But Fairford Town, they're also a team that, I mean, the best finishing in the first qualifying round, which they've reached 6 times. I think it's got to be at some point that they, actually go on a step further and get to that second qualifying round. But yeah, it's just an odd team that at the moment for this game I've gone with a 1-0 Cribs win. It's not a much between these two teams, I'm going to be honest. Aylesbury United versus Flackwell Heath. Aylesbury United are a deeply historic club in the non-league scene. They won the Southern League Premier Division in 1987-88. They were also in the Eastern League at some points in time. They've reached the third round of the FA Cup in 1994-95, reached the semi-finals of the FA Trophy in 2002-2003. During that actual FA Cup third round performance in 1994-95, I think it is worth discussing about some of the teams that they managed to progress through. in order to get to where they did to get to that round, because they beat, we lost 4-0 to Queen's Park Rangers, but they have also, it wasn't during that FA Cup run, I don't think, but they faced up against Watford in the first round of the FA Cup as well in 1951-52. And I think they've just been a solid team over the years. They've been up there at the top end of football, to be honest. And yeah, they were even in the conference in 1988-89. I mean, they were immediately promoted in 1987-98, 87-88, and got immediately relegated back again. But were placed in the Isthmian League instead. But yeah, I think they were, for a while, a solid Step 2 club. It's not the case anymore, but I think they should be able to get, historically, a bigger club than the Flackwell Heath, which has been in the Isthmian League for a while. They've been to the fourth qualifying round, actually reached the fourth qualifying round last season in Flackwell Heath. So I thought they did quite well last season. They also reached the quarterfinals of the FA Vase in 2020-21. And in 2024-25 reached the third qualifying round of the FA Trophy. They're a team that has been a bit of a one which has been growing, I think, is Flackwell Heath. Or maybe flatlining, but at Tier H standard, it's not a bad place to flatline for a team that is the second team in Wycombe, I would probably say. But I've gone with a 2-0 Flackwell Heath win. I think Ellesmere United have been a bit disappointing in recent years. I think it's worth touching also upon Kingstonian versus Hastings United. Kingstonian are an odd team, aren't they? If you don't know the situation, Kingstonian were 3 times winners of the Isthmian League, most recently in 1997-98, 3 times runners-up as well. Twice won the FA Trophy, also won the FA Amateur Cup, twice were runners-up in Conference League Cup, having, also reached the 4th round of the FA Cup in 2000, 2001. And yeah, they were a massive team. They got past Brentford 3-1. They then beat Southport 2-1. And then beat Southend United 1-0. Before holding Bristol City to a replay at Ashton Gate, only to lose 1-0 at home. So they were probably one of the best teams then. And if you remember back, Javelin Holligan, who played for Wycombe at one point, played at Kingstonian in the early days of his career, and then he actually became a singer. But yeah, so I think you look at this team, and they've been in the National League before, and then the reason that they've sort of tumbled all the way down the league is they've had to leave their home ground. So Kings Meadow was their ground. And then Kingstonian went into administration in 2001. AFC Wimbledon then bought out the ground to rescue the club, and they had a ground sharing agreement in place. But then Kings Meadow was sold to Chelsea for the women's team, and in 2016 they basically kicked Kingstonian out. So they've been homeless essentially for the last part of a decade, and I don't think there's any intentions of moving into a permanent ground I've seen any near time in the future. And it sort of ruined the club. And then they're facing up against Hastings United, who are another team that is truly historic, and they won the Southern League, Southern Division once, and the Southern League Eastern Division once, and a lot of times they won the Southern League Cup as well. But been up there, and twice reached the 3rd round of the FA Cup. Most recently, of course, in 2012-13, where they beat the likes of, well, they were a lowest ranked team. They lost 4-1 to Middlesbrough. But no disgrace, in the third round in that one. But I mean, in the 1953-54 one was probably slightly the more impressive one, beating Swindon Town 4-1 before holding Norwich City to a 3-3 draw at home, only to lose 3-0 away. So there's been sort of two of these teams which are vastly experienced, and you would wonder if Hastings United have the ability to, at some point, look at Worthing down the coast, have the ability to go and compete in the National League South, at least at some point. I've gone 3-1 to Hastings United. An interesting team, to say the least, and probably want to keep your eye on at some point. Forest Row versus New Haven. I think Forest Row are a relatively new team in the book. Their first FA Cup was last season. So, yeah, I think it's worth having, just looking at how some of the newer people might be able to perform, as they're taking on New Haven, who, well, they're a bit more of a traditional one. They reached fourth qualifying round of the FA Cup in 1926-27. I think, have they been in the Isthmian League before? No, but they've certainly been in the Southern Combination for a while. And they were in the playoff final up against Eastbourne Town in 2023-24 to get to the Southern League. And I thought of the Isthmian League. And I thought they might have been able to do it. And I think there's still parts of me which says they could maybe do it. But I think, in terms of, for me, it's going to be 4-2 to New Haven. Still think Forest Row have to wait a bit to have their sort of moment in the sun. Faversham Strike Force versus Snodland Town. Both of these two teams relatively recent on the scene. Faversham Strike Force's first FA Cup was last season, and also they reached the third round of the FA Vars last season as well. But yeah, I think they're one of them teams that I don't think anyone's really heard of them before. I'm playing in Whitstable actually at the moment because they're ground sharing. They're one of them ones which I'm not a huge fan of because they ground shared to get promotion. Snodland Town reached a preliminary round twice, but again, nothing much impressive in the FA Cup to speak about. But they also reached the third round of the FA Vars last season. We talk about these two teams because I think there's a possibility that one of these two teams goes on a good cup run this year. I've got a 2-2 draw and Snodland Town to win on a replay. Everyone knows the story of West Auckland Town, so I won't bore you with that again. So I'm going to go Carlisle City versus Northallerton Town as the one I will be talking about in this one. They've changed some of it to earlier kickoffs. So Carlisle City, the second team in Carlisle, were Northern League Division 2 champions in 21-22. Have 4 times reached the first qualifying round of the FA Cup, all during the 70s though. But they did reach the third round of the FA Vars in 24-25 and 23-24. I think they're a team that could well be, able at some point to, if they have a good cup run, there's something in there for me that they could maybe beat their cup record this season round. They got to at some point, I think. Northallerton Town should have been relegated if it wasn't for Borough Rangers and West Allotment Celtic both hitting their own respective problems. But Northallerton Town twice reaching the 4 qualifying round of the FA Cup in the 1990s, 4th round of the FA Vars in 2002-03 as well, 3rd round of the FA Trophy in 1992-93. They were a team that sort of negatively affected a bit by the Northern Premier League coming along and mainly taking teams from Northwest, as I think Northallerton at one point would maybe consider themselves strong enough to compete in that league. I don't think anymore. The two clubs sort of going different directions. But I've gone 2-2 draw for Carlisle City to win the replay in Yorkshire. Consett versus North Shields. I think I've got a friend who's going to this game. So I hope it's a good one for his sake, but I'm not convinced myself. Consett are a club on the rise. They reached twice in the first round of the FA Cup, actually, 1958-59 and 1996-97. And in 2019-20 were runners-up over the FA Vars when the Northern League had that dominant spell in the Vars. And they finished a solid 10th last season in the Northern Premier League Division 1 East. And actually, interesting story, in 1946-47, the Consett actually applied to join the Football League. But they didn't manage it. There wasn't even a vote. But, how different things could have been if Consett were in the Football League. That would have been absolutely mental. Can you imagine a team the size of Consett in the Football League? North, I might do that as a video actually. Teams that failed their applications to join the Football League and what happened to them in the immediate aftermath. North Shields, I was really, really happy with North Shields. I saw a North Shields versus West Didsbury and Chorlton game in the FA Vars. Wasn't last season, I think the season before. And Michael Richards was also in attendance. It was a cracker of a game, it really was. And at the full time, you suddenly had all this pyro getting whipped out and everything. It was like the fourth round of the FA Vars, and it just brought home to me what it means to such clubs to have such a good run in a cup competition. There's a shorts on it on my channel for when I went there, and it's been one of my favourite grounds. They've won the FA Amateur Cup and won the FA Vars in 2014-15 during that time, as I said, that the Northern teams were so dominant. They've twice reached the second round of the FA Cup as well. Don't think they're going to be able to beat that now. But they really need the money, they were basically relegated because their ground wasn't good enough, and then they had to release their entire squad to raise enough funds to rebuild up from scratch midway through a season. I've got 0-0 draw, and I've got North Shields to win the replay at home. Fantastic occasion should be at Bellevue Stadium. Whitley Bay versus Easington Colliery. I was talking chatting along on text to a fan of Whitley Bay who was talking about how, they're a club that should really be a lot higher than they are. 4 times winners of the FA Vars, semi-finalists of the FA Amateur Cup twice, reached the third round of the FA Trophy before, and the third round of the FA Cup in 1989-90. It is worth mentioning that during that time, it was a real heyday of Whitley Bay. They got past Scarborough 1-0, and then they beat Preston North End 2-0 before losing 1-0 to Rochdale. So it was a really good time, and that they were actually Northern Premier League Division 1 winners in 1990-91. So they had that recent success for 4 times winning the FA Vars in 2010s, having come down a bit from a Northern Premier League. And they were in a Premier Division at one point. It was a absolute, Whitley Bay well had the capacity at one point to go and kick on, and if they wanted to become a team involved in the National League North, like South Shields is now, or Hebburn, a team in North Tyneside with Whitley Bay and Tynemouth in the catchment area, it could definitely have, inspired and captured the imagination. And, it wasn't that long afterwards. If they peaked maybe slightly later, I'm talking, minutiae later, they could well have been invited to join the Conference North, and, the rest would have been a bit different history in terms of that. But they're taking on Easington Colliery, who themselves are quite deeply historic. They reached the first round of the FA Cup in 1955-56, fourth round of the FA Vase in 1982-83. Maybe not as historic, but I think they only lost 2-0 to Tranmere Rovers in that time. They reached the first round of the FA Cup. And I think, the FA Cup, it brings the best out of it. It's sort of occasion. I've gone 2-1 to Whitley Bay. Birtley Town versus Bishop Auckland. Bishop Auckland, another one of them ones that massively historic, should be much, much higher. Birtley, furthest they reached is the first qualifying round of the FA Cup. So they have a chance to shock a lot of people by going and knocking out Bishop Auckland, because I feel like everywhere Bishop go, there's always about 400 in attendance, because most of it's away sides. They were relegated from the Northern Prem Division 1 East last season, but we talk about them a lot. Fourth round of the FA Cup in 1954-55. Quarter-finalists of the FA Trophy 3 times, but it was a record amount of winners of the FA Amateur Cup, which is a grand total of, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 times winners of the FA Amateur Cup. And, they are another team which should have been playing much, much higher. And they were in the Northern Premier League Premier Division at one point, but they were relegated on a technicality in 2002. So it's just unfortunate, really, that clubs have to be relegated because of their grounds. And it was one of them ones that if they invested in their ground, where would they be now? Another one of them ones. So I've gone 4-1 to Bishop Auckland in this one. A lot of work has been gone to Heritage Park, and I suspect away a lot of followers will go with Bishop Auckland for this game. Penrith versus Bridlington Town. Can Penrith cause an upset? There's a league apart between these two teams. Penrith did reach the second round of the FA Cup in 1981-82, where I think it was a very impressive display. They beat Chester 1-0 at home before losing 3-0 to Doncaster Rovers. So yeah, a decent team which has only really ever spent time in the Northern League. And actually, it was Brilly Bremner, if you remember him, who managed Doncaster Rovers during that time. But Chester City was a football league club, when Penrith knocked them out. And so they're taking on Bridlington Town, who last season finished just shy of the playoffs in the Northern Premier League Division 1 East. And have really been growing. They've been in the Northern Premier League First Division champions in 1992-93. And then they sort of also won the FA Vase in that season. And reached the first round of the FA Cup in 1960-61 and 1991-92. But I think when you're looking at these teams, Bridlington is definitely a team which has ability to compete back at the top end of the league again. Some point they will do. I've gone 2-1 to Bridlington Town. I just don't think Penrith caused the upset this time round. Shildon versus Blythe Town. I love talking about these northeastern teams because they're so etched in history. And just another one, second round, Shildon reached the FA Vase in 1936-37. And it was, they beat Stalybridge Celtic 4-2. And you're like, oh, so what? Stalybridge Celtic were a football league team, I believe, at this point in time. They've ended up actually lost 3-0 against Dartford. I'm sure we'll talk about Dartford at some point and in the later on. They also were quarter-finalists of the FA Amateur Cup. And in 2012-13, reached the semi-finals of the FA Vase. But yeah, a team who, for the last couple of seasons, have been really knocking on the door of the return to the Northern Premier League Division 1 East. So I think at some point they may well make that return. Blythe Town were relegated from Northern Premier League Division 1 East last season, but that was their highest ever finish, and they've never been great in the FA Cup though. So if they can prove a lot of people wrong and go go and I mean, the club only reformed in 2018. Like, they're still a relatively new club in that regard. So it would be immense if they managed to go and do a good cup run for a change. I've gone 2-1 to Blythe Town. I've gone Blythe Town to sort of actually go and have a good cup run for once. And make a change, wouldn't it? Ashington versus Horden CW, and I don't think Ashington fans are particularly looking forward to sort of facing Horden. They reached the third round of the FA Cup Ashington in 1926-27, and also reached the semi-finals of the FA Amateur Cup in 1973-74. And it was versus Rochdale that they were knocked out in the 1950s FA Cup second round. So they have certainly had a lot of history behind them, and I think their support is growing at the moment. They're just about scraped survival towards the end of the season in Northern Premier League Division 1 East. But interesting enough, they were actually founding members of the Football League 3rd Division North in 1921. They're one of the rarities in football, but used to be a Football League team, which is now playing in the depths of the non-league. The other likes of Nelson, Glossop, North End, I think there's a few others as well, which we'll be talking about. Stalybridge Celtic, which I'm sure we'll be talking about later on in this video. They were facing against Horden CW, who reached the second round of the FA Cup in 1938-39. Again, another very decent team in the early days of the FA Cup, only losing 3-2 to Newport County. And yeah, they were a historic team which have a couple of times reached the early stages of the FA Cup. I think either of these two teams can sort of be proud of their history. I've gone a 1-1 draw. I've gone Ashington to win the replay. But I think Ashington fans have really sort of made it known to me that they do not want a replay at Horden's ground. I'll go Gisborough Town versus Thornaby. As Gisborough are new boys in Northern Premier League Division 1 East. They were promoted as winners of the Northern League last season. And it's the highest they will ever play. But they have reached the final of the FA Vase before in 1979-80. A very successful run in that competition. And they did reach the first round of the FA Cup back in 1988-89. So I certainly think for Gisborough Town to have reached this level, we're talking about a club which, they're really on the up, and they're up against on a Teesside rivalry, Thornaby, who seem to have attracted a lot of fans at the moment to the club. And there was a bit of controversy about their women team at one point, but I think in terms of you look at the men's team, the original Stockton, which then became Thornaby on Tees, which then became Thornaby, reached the third round of the FA Cup in 1951-52. I'm not necessarily considering it the same club, but this club did reach the semi-finals of the FA Amateur Club in 1986-87. 1896-97. That is definitely, that's not the same club. This club was formed in 2000, wasn't it? Yeah. But they seem to have a lot of people on board at the moment in terms of fans. Get a lot of people through the gate receipts. So I think they're also a club in the upward trajectory. I think they were promoted from Northern League Division 2 only a couple of seasons back. I've gone 2-0 to Gisborough Town, though, because the stock they're having at the moment, which is rising, they're phenomenal. I'm going to need an FA Cup funds to keep that run going. Crooktown versus Pickering Town. I know Crooktown were poor last season, only just staying up, but they reached the third round of the FA Cup in 1931-32 and were quarterfinalists of the FA Vase in 2005-06. So yeah, for me, Crooktown were quite a historic club. And they were actually the first English club side to tour in India, where they played 6 matches and including a 1-0 defeat to the Indian national team. watched by 100,000 people. So there's a little bit of interesting trivia for you about Crooktown. I bet you never knew that, right? I bet you never knew that. Pickering Town, well, they're an interesting team themselves. The furthest they reached was the second qualifying round of the FA Cup, which included the most recent time was last season. They did it 3 times. I've reached the quarterfinals of the FA Vars in 2005-06. Yeah, I think in terms of a team, I haven't really impressed. They've been in the Northern Premier League Division 1 East at one point in the time. But yeah, I think when we're talking about the fact that they weren't able to reach the Northern Premier League Premier Division, I don't think, due to their ground. But I don't think they'll have aspiration for that at the moment. Certainly not with them being in Tier 9. I've gone 3-0 to Crooktown. I think a good historic club. Some interesting facts. Newton Aycliffe versus Kendal Town. Newton Aycliffe, one of them ones that were relegated last season from the Northern Premier League Division 1 East. Maybe a slightly overperformance for them. They reached the furthest they reached the second round qualifying of the FA Cup, so could probably do a bit better in the cup competitions. But yeah, they have certainly. I think they were overperforming being in the Northern Premier League. I think a lot of people will probably agree with me on that one. They faced up against Kendal Town, though, who has switched constantly between the North West Counties League and obviously. Well, they've also been in the Conference North before and actually reached the playoffs in the Conference North in 2008-09, only to lose to Ilkeston Town. And then they reached it again in 2009-10, losing to Bradford Park Avenue. But then they sort of had a tumble through the leagues. But they're founding members of the Northern Premier League, reached the FA Cup second round in 1949-50 and 1963-64. Truly a deeply historic club who should be performing at a much higher level than Tier 9. I will say that. But unfortunately, they're not. And I think they do win this cup game 1-0. Yes, moving on to Blyth Spartans versus Newcastle Blue Star. I think this game is the one which a lot of people will be looking at as probably maybe even the game of a round. Blyth Spartans are, well, I think every pundit in the country up and down will tell you about its 1977-78 FA Cup campaign. Why does everyone talk about 1977-78 FA Cup campaign? Well, it was the furthest that a non-league team had gotten in the FA Cup ever. Now, Blyth Spartans in the second round beat Chesterfield 1-0, where they started to make their name. They then beat Enfield 1-0 before beating Stoke City away 3-2. So we're the first club to reach the non-league club to reach the fifth round since Yeovil 1948-49. I think they were the last one since last season where or was for the level they were at last season because they're tier 6. I think Maidstone United may have broken that, and they held Wrexham to a draw and then went to St James's Park and lost 2-1. But you know, tons of people flooded to Newcastle United's ground, and you know they've been in the National League before. They should be doing much better than they are. They have a Gibraltar international, or did last season, I don't know if they still do, called Paddy McClafferty in the squad. A truly historic club that sort of should be doing so much better than they are. They're in a bit of a downwards decline. They're up against a tough opposition, though, in Newcastle Blue Star tomorrow, who themselves were in the Northern Premier League at one point. They were sort of flying at one point in the Northern Premier League Premier Division. Well, we promoted to that level in 2008-9, but they had too much money, but then seized in 2009, and all the good times came to a halt. I actually saw them in the FA Cup last season up against Marine. They had a good run there. It wasn't as good as their first round run in 1984-85, and they actually won the FA Vase in 1977-78. But club that I have been impressed with, been to both of these grounds actually. I've gone 1-0 to Blythe Spartans. I think that league difference might be it, but they may not be in league difference next season. I'll tell you what, I think Newcastle Blue Star could well get promoted. Whether Blythe Spartans get relegated, I'm not too sure. Euxton Villa versus Atherton Laburnum Rovers. Euxton Villa are a very new team. Their first FA Cup campaign was last season. Couldn't get past the preliminary round. But it'll be interesting to see, if these new boys can face down a very historic team in Atherton Laburnum Rovers, who, they've only reached the third qualifying round as the furthest they've been in this competition. The FA Vase, they reached the semi-finals, though, in 1993-94. Maybe not as good as they were at one point. But, yeah, they've been in the Northern Prem before, so and I'm impressed, up against the likes of Aldershot in the past as well. So yeah, it could be an interesting one. Both of these ones have been in Division 1 more recently, the North West Counties League fairly recently, but I must say Atherton Laburnum Rovers were close last season to reaching the Northern Premier League Division 1 West. I've gone 5-0 to Laburnum Rovers. I'm sorry, Euxton Villa, but I just don't see you winning. Liversedge versus Penistone Church. Liversedge they were winners of the Northern Counties East League Premier Division last season, and therefore returned to the Northern Premier League Division 1 East. So, I mean, this is a typical sort of team that we can talk about how the FA Cup helped the club. And so in 2004-5 season, Liversedge reached the fourth qualifying round of the FA Cup. And they took Colville Town to a replay, and that was televised. So the draw saw them televised, so they were the TV cameras were there for the televised draw. But the Sedge for that point couldn't get promoted to the NCEL. From the NCEL to the NPL. So they therefore had to change because it had a large slope on the ground. So they flattened the field due to, that FA Cup fund helped fund that. And therefore they did eventually get to Northern Premier League. So we're talking here about, the difference an FA Cup run makes. And I think none more so than Liversedge will know that difference. Penistone Church, well, they a bit mid-table, were not really too interested in the fact then. I will mention, though, because we've not got much interest in it, John Stones, the England international, the one who played for Manchester City last season, well, he actually originally came from Penistone, and I think he may have actually attended Penistone Church's academy when he was a very young man, before he went to a proper academy football. So at least he's got something. But I'm on Liversedge 4-1, the club which knows the true value of a cup run. Horbury Town versus Golkar United. I think this has been moved to an earlier kickoff, unfortunately. But yeah, Horbury Town, second ever FA Cup. They were in 24-25, the Division 1 champions of Northern Counties East League. And so therefore, on a bit of a high rise at the moment, and a club who are rising up the leagues. Whereas Golcar United is sort of mid-table mediocrity and haven't really, for me, ever had that great of a FA Cup run. So I think one of these two teams maybe has a standout cup run this season. How about it, eh? I've got a 1-1 draw, and I've gone for Golcar United to win the replay. It wouldn't be a video without me mentioning Frickley Athletic versus Campion. Well, Frickley Athletic anyway. The team that is so deeply historic. Great immense amount of FA Cup. They reached the third round in 1985-86 of the FA Cup, where they beat Hales Owen on a replay, not too surprising, and then beat Hartlepool United 1-0 before losing 3-1 to Rotherham United. They were quarter-finalists of the FA Trophy in 1984-85. In 85-86, they were second in the Alliance Premier League. Now, the Alliance Premier League, for those who don't know, is what is now called the National League. So, in terms of, they were very much early day members and long-term members of the Alliance Premier League conference, whatever you want to call it. They should be playing at a far, far higher level than the tier 8 they find themselves now. They've sort of tumbled through the leagues. And Campion, well, they were close to reaching the playoffs last season, but the best campaign in the FA Cup was the first qualifying round replay in 24-25. Just haven't really done much in cup competition. So I think maybe it's about time we see that change for Campion, but I think we will. I think Campion win 4-0. We'll go Wythenshawe versus Padiham. Wythenshawe were promoted back to the Northern Premier League Division 1 West last season by winning the North West Counties League. So I think it is worth maybe talking about them. Because, you know what? As a team in the FA Cup, they haven't actually had a lot of success in Tier 8. That is, they've furthest they reached was the first qualifying round in 25-26. I just think they need to go on and do a bit better. Now, I don't think they've overly been much in the FA Cup, so I think that does play a part. And it will be a difficult game against Padiham, who were actually the playoff winners in the North West Counties League last season. So it's both of the two teams who went up in the North West Counties League, but Padiham have been at this level before. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's one of them ones that, I mean, we do remember, don't we, when Congleton were fined 160 quid for their supporters being racist, but Padiham were being fined 165 quid because they left the pitch in protest. Like, double standards much, right? Anyway, in this game, I've gone with a huge scoreline of 6-2 to Wythenshawe. I think there's going to be a huge gulf between these two teams on this pitch in this performance. Liveland Remisay, or Remyca. We'll sing it like Resbc for the sake of that, but we're relegated, or reprieve rather, relegation from the North West Counties League last season. Maybe should have been relegated, but the fact that Stockport Town, Pilkington, and City of Liverpool all withdrew from the league meant that they were reprieved. So maybe consider themselves a bit lucky being in this editions of the FA Cup, but they've never done that well in them, to be honest, up to date. So maybe it's about time for it to change. Charnock Richard, a bit of an average team, in all honesty, and also have several times reached the first qualifying round, but haven't quite gone on beyond it. In 2023, actually, they played against Bury in the FA Cup preliminary round, so we're one of the new boys, the new oppositions that Bury had to face up against in the FA Cup. I've gone 5-2 to Charnock Richard. I just don't think Liverpool are a good team in cup competitions. Fackley versus Albion Sports. And Fackley were close to being relegated last season. They've a few times reached the second qualifying round of the FA Cup. They've reached the fifth round of the FA Vars before. But again, we're talking about a team that there's not a lot of history. But they did actually, in 1975, have a friendly up against FC Barcelona. So they were meant to play up against Leeds United and in the semi-finals, and then due to train at Bradford City's Valley Parade. But Bradford City actually had to have a game at Valley Parade. So Fackley, they ended up having them as a whole training ground, and therefore Fackley played Barcelona in 1975. So another interesting little bit of a tidbit for you. This sort of stuff happens at the lower levels, so it's just absolutely mental. Albion Sports, well, it could potentially be relegated last season, couldn't they? They reached the fourth round of the FA Cup, the FA Vars rather, in 24-25. I think they've been all right in cup competitions. Maybe could kick on and go that extra gear up. But the fact that they were almost relegated last season might mean it's a bit tough. But Farsley Celtic couldn't compete in the league, so it was inevitable that they were going to be allowed to stay when they finished the second team up from the bottom. I've gone Fackley to win 3-1. I love these little bit of information that you sometimes get. We'll go Wythenshawe Town versus Cheadle Town next. We're skipping a few because I don't want to talk about every club in detail. We just don't have time. But yeah, Wythenshawe Town were relegated from Northern Premier League Division 1 West last season, having just stayed up the season before. It was kind of obvious it was going to happen. But here for quarterfinals for FA Vars in 2021-22, I thought this was a real club on the rise, to be honest. And had a lot of investment going into it with some of the players that they were involved with. But alas, seems to have been a faded star now. But yes, they are facing up against Cheadle Town, who were in the North West County last season, now in the Midland League, which is farcical for Cheadle to be in the Midland League. Like, why is that even a thing, by the way? But they haven't quite managed to kick on, really, to get... So they were promoted from the Division 1 South from the North West County in 2022-23. But, yeah, I think we're talking about teams that aren't really... They haven't done a great deal. They did actually... Derby fans, like myself, if you were in the 1990s, you may remember a certain Ashley Ward in 1996-97 scored 9 goals. And then the season after actually moved to Barnsley and scored 20 goals. He was a good player, Ashley Ward, back in the 90s. Free-flowing goal scorer. And he started out his career in Cheadle Town as a kid. And they actually, I believe, have Paul Turnbull as their manager. Stockport County, you may remember him, or Macclesfield Town fans. Seeming Stockport Town have done the duff. What did happen to Stockport Town? Like, why did they resign from the league? They signed Bobby Savage. It's an odd one. A very odd one. I've gone Wythenshawe Town to win 4-0. I think it's not too much of a surprise, that one. I think they're still a cut above. Ramsbottom United versus South Liverpool. Now, this is not the same South Liverpool that some of you may be familiar with. So the original South Liverpool was folded in 1921, but relocated then in in 1921 to New Brighton and became known as the New Brighton Football Club. And they joined the Football League as in 1923 for Division 3 North, and actually stayed in the Division 3 North until 1951. And it's a bit of a similar situation to the sort of MK Dons Wimbledon situation, just a lot earlier. Again, it's probably maybe even worth doing a whole video dedicated, especially for that controversial move. But this club itself has reached the second round of the FA Cup 3 times, if you take the original club, that is. But this club has reached the fourth round of the FA Vase a couple of occasions, including last season. So the original club were Welsh Cup winners. They were, a deeply historic club. If there was anything like a similar situation or got a similar remnants passing on, I don't know, because they're taking on Ramsbottom United, who have Harry Williams actually founded the club back in 1966, and I believe he's still the chairman. Now, that's a long time. He's coming up. Actually, this will be his. Surely it will be like his 60th anniversary running the club. Surely, Harry Williams, mate, pass it on. It's even called Harry Williams at Riverside Stadium. But my days, what a guy, and they finished second in the North West Counties League last season. They've been in the Northern Premier League Premier Division, or Division 1 North at least. And yeah, they've been in the Premier Division before. This is like the Dorking Wanderers project by Mark White on steroids. It's just happened over such a long period of time that no one's been talking about it anymore. I've gone 2-0 to Ramsbottom United. I think based on the current club, Ramsbottom is definitely the more favourites. Let's talk about Atherton Collieries and their trip to Barnoldswick Town. Barnoldswick is a team that have pretty much underperformed. The best FA Cup performance was in 24-25 when we reached second qualifying round. Haven't been a great team, to be honest. Nothing to do, I don't think, with the one which was originally the Lancashire combination. And there's just sort of a new club, relatively speaking, forming in 1972. Just find their way into life and being involved in the FA Cup. But Atherton Collieries. Now, for those who don't know, Atherton Collieries versus South Shields at South Shields was my first ever non-league game I went to. And that sort of shows the difference between the two teams. That, Atherton Collieries are now in Tier 8 in the NPL Division 1 West, whereas South Shields are almost in the National League, just knocking on the door. So the changing direction between these two clubs. And I thought at one point Atherton Collieries were just going to carry on falling down into the North West Counties League. But they've twice reached the third qualifying round as Atherton Collieries. They've also reached the fifth round of the FA Vase before. I mean, a truly, truly historic club, which for me should be, back in the NPL at some point. 2-1 to Atherton Collieries. Well, how can I go through a predictions video without mentioning my beloved Glossop North End? It would be a bit farcical of me. Now, Tadcaster Albion have got a bit of history about them, to be honest. The fact is that they, in terms of the FA Cup, not a lot. They've reached the sixth round of the FA Vase before, but they have also been in the Northern Premier League before, Division 1 North, and sort of have flatlined a bit, but they did take part in the playoffs last season in the Northern Counties East, so maybe worth talking about them. I think they were knocked out in the playoff finals by Beverley Town, but taking on Glossop North End, which I love mentioning this fact, smallest town who have ever played in the Football League. top flight, North League, the Football League Division 1. And were finalists in the FA Vars in both 2009 and 2015. And yeah, I mean, actually, the benefactor when they did get to the English top flight was a certain Sir Samuel Hillwood, who actually later on became chairman of Arsenal. So, this little old club has actually pushed beyond so many things and has, understandably, got a lot of history behind it. They reached the quarter-finals of the FA Cup at one point in 1908-09. And since being a non-league club, have reached the fourth qualifying round before as well. I think it is worth mentioning that. Truly historic team. Who've been in the Northern Premier League and the Football League before. But I think that feels like a million miles away from nowadays. But, they had a good start to the season. They did win, and I think they're going to win this FA Cup game as well. 2-0 to Glossop North End. You got back Derbyshire lads. Burscough versus Droylsden, and also you'd be unsurprised that I'm going to be mentioning Droylsden. Burscough itself have been Northern Premier League Premier Division champions in 2006-07. The season before they actually reached the second round of the FA Cup. But yeah, it was the early 2000s that really stood them out. And I think, did they end up ever actually in the conference? But I don't know if they did. But they actually had some very interesting managers before. Such as the likes of former Liverpool, Galatasaray and West Ham midfielder Mike Marsh at one point was manager. But yeah, I think only on an interim basis. On a permanent basis, but he didn't last long anyway. He wasn't a very successful manager in all. But yeah, a solid sort of team that should maybe have been allowed into the Conference North. But I don't think they did. In terms of Droylsden, well, they're another historic club as well. So these two teams, they go way back in terms of the early days of football. Droylsden were, some of the highest standard up there. They were, I think, in the conference at one point as well. They joined the Conference North as founder members. That was it. And reached the final of the playoffs to get to the Conference National. And actually did get to the Conference National at one point. And, proper sort of historic club. Reached the second round proper of the FA Cup a couple of 3 times, I think it was. FA Vars quarter finalist recently last season. But basically, we're a club which was promoted back to North West County D Premier Division last season by the playoffs. They withdrew from a pyramid because of COVID. It really hit the club badly. It was one of the worst ones that were affected by COVID. So it's really good to see that they didn't fold, because I think a lot of people were worried they're going to hit the wall. I've gone 2-1 to Burscough, though. I think Burscough has had a little bit more time to adjust to this level. And Droylsden is still a bit hungover from their absence. Keighley Town versus Longridge Town. Keighley, for those who don't know, used to be known as Eccleshill United. So you may recognise that name because they renamed this season. But it makes much more sense for me for them to be Keighley, as they are now owned by Keighley Cougars Rugby League Club as well, by the way. They have thrice reached the second qualifying round of the FA Cup. But I just don't think really they've had much to write home about as a club. But maybe under the new ownership and the new identity that has come with it, they can go and strive onto future things. Longridge Town themselves, again, not necessarily the greatest. Lee Ashcroft, if you are a Preston fan, or maybe a Grimsby fan, a West Brom fan even, them three particularly, maybe Wigan as well, might remember who he is. He was, I think, probably most successful with them three clubs. And he's the manager of Longridge Town. If you were wondering why I was talking about him, I think it'll be a 1-1 draw. And I think in terms of a replay, you see Heathley Town winning the replay. Starport Swifts versus Hanley Town. I think Starport are an interesting one. They've transferred to the Hellenic League from the Midland League. They've twice reached the third qualifying round of the FA Cup back in the very turn of a millennium. But in terms of recently, I mean, they were in the Southern League at one point. So that is something to mention as well. And they're taking on Hanley Town, who won the Midland League Premier Division last season, making an instant return to Northern Premier League Division 1 West. Should really be at that level, I think. They've twice in very recent years, last 5 years or so, reached the third qualifying round of the FA Cup. As someone who's sort of been good these early rounds, they reached the third round of the FA Vars as well last season. And they were actually part of the original Hanley Town was part of a combination, the original combination, which you may know as being an alternative to the Football League, which sort of went bust very early on. I've gone 7-0 to Hanley Town, which is one of the reasons why I've drawn this game out for your attention. Pershaw Town versus Brockton. I'll go with it next. And in terms of Pershaw, they were lucky to stay in the Hellenic League last season. In 1993-94, they did reach the fourth qualifying round of the FA Cup. And I think it was actually, they were on telly for that game by way against Yeading on the BBC. So I think Pershaw haven't ever really acclaimed much heights or success league-wise, but maybe in the FA Cup they can yet again have a decent run. Brockton almost reached in the playoffs last season. Similar situation of haven't really had much league success. They haven't had much cup success either. I think for this one, we're going to see a 1-1 draw, and we're going to see Brockton win the replay. Of course, I have to mention Stafford Rangers versus Tividale. I think I had a Stafford Rangers fan at one point watching this channel, so shout out to whatever happened to win. They're in the NPL Division 1 West after a series of steep decline, to be honest. I'm just looking at this team. They've reached the fourth round of the FA Cup in 1974-75. So we know that was a decent one as well. They beat Stockport County on a replay, then beat Halifax Town, then beat Rotherham United on a replay before losing to Peterborough United. So a very good run back in that time. They've also twice won the FA Trophy in the 1970s. They were in the conference before, having won runners-up in the Conference North in 2005-06. So it was, and they won the ensuing playoffs to then get to the conference where they won the Conference League Cup. Truly a fall from grace. You know, they were founding members of the Alliance Premier League. Spent so many times and seasons at the right top echelons of the non-league pyramid, and yet it never quite looked the same in the last 10 years. And it's a bit of a shame, that, isn't it? And Tividale, well, just not a great outfit, really. I mean, no disrespect, they did reach the fourth qualifying round of the FA Cup in 1975-76 and have been in the Northern Premier League Division 1 South before. But compared to Stafford Rangers, you'd expect Stafford to win comfortably, and I've gone with them to win 3-1. I recently went to Gresley Rovers versus, well, they were up against Hina at that point, and they're up against Bouldermere St Michael's in this one. And I was looking at Gresley Rovers ground, and you can see my reaction on the non-league show. I won't talk too much about that right now, but a lovely historic ground from when the time that they were playing in the Southern League before, and Northern Premier League Division 1 South as well. They used to be, regular competitors up against the likes of Burton Albion before, back in them days, and there was a bit of a local rivalry between that. But the ground wasn't ever quite good enough to get into the football conference. But they did actually win the Southern League Premier Division in 1996-97. So, and it did mean that many Gresley players did leave the pitch. There was actually a story, I don't know how much truth it has to it, but until because at this point in time, Derby were about to move into the new Pride Park Stadium, and so Gresley Rovers were offered the baseball ground to play at until their ground came up to the desired standards, and the FA reputedly rejected that idea. But how mental that would have been! Gresley Rovers playing at the BBG, up against the likes of Burton Albion in the conference. It would have been quite something. And they have reached the first round of the FA Cup before in 1930-31. But yeah, what a truly historic team Gresley were. And you know what? I would have loved to see that become a reality. Gresley being a team that playing at the baseball ground. I mean, I'm kind of glad that they didn't, because moving in, because they also talked about creating a new stadium on the outskirts of the town, and the ground they inhabit is a beautiful little, facility. Definitely able, I think, to still play at maybe Southern League Division 1 level at least. I mean, you could even add a few chairs, and you could probably get it up at least another level and get it up to scratch for the level above that. Boldmere St Michael's, the club we are actually now highly rated out of the two, as they are in NPL Division 1 Midlands. They have only twice reached the second qualifying round of the FA Cup as their furthest. I think the difference between the two is a bit different. I mean, talking about India earlier, they actually played the Indian Olympics team prior to the 1948 Summer Olympics. So a little bit of a trivia about them as well. I think it'll be a 2-2 draw for me, but Boldmere St Michael's, unfortunately, I think, win the replay. We'll go to Congleton Town versus AFC Wolverhampton City next. Just to sort of save time, we just need to cut out a few here and there. Northern Premier League Division 1 West Side, Congleton. They're a decent enough team. They've spent time needing to recover and rebuild. They've had... anyone really mention Jimmy Quinn? Jimmy Quinn, if you're familiar with him, if you're a Reading fan in particular, you might remember his 5-year stint with you. Well, he was at one point with Congleton Town in his early days of his career. But yeah, in terms of the FA Cup, they reached the first round in 1989-90. The highest they finished was the Northern Premier League Division 1 in 6th place in 1989-90. In terms of Congleton, a decent team, probably no better than sort of tier 8 level, I would say. But they're playing against AFC Wolverhampton City. You may not have heard of this team before, but they were known as AFC Wolfrinians until fairly recently. Twice reached the 4th qualifying round of the FA Cup, 4th round of the FA Vase in 2015-16. But not a lot of history to write home about, so you would suggest that Congleton maybe should be winning this one. And I'm going to go and agree with that. 3-1 to Congleton Town. Well, Worcester Raiders versus Ashby Ivanhoe. I've been to Ashby Ivanhoe's ground before. They had a bumper crowd at the beginning of the season. But Worcester Raiders seems to be the team which is growing. They've actually now inhabited Claines Lane, which is the FA ground, I think, which Worcester City were inhabiting before they moved to the Six Fields, is it called, the big rugby ground. So Worcester Raiders were actually promoted to Tier 8 via the playoffs last season. So they are six ways. They are they need a cup run to balance out the success in the league, I think it's fair to say. But Ashby Ivanhoe might cause a thorn in the side for the club, who is rising fast at the moment. With Ashby Ivanhoe's, reaching a couple of times, reaching the first qualifying round of the FA Cup, maybe to push on and get to that level up, they will need to have a good cup run, because I don't think their ground is anywhere near abilities to be NPL Division 1 Midlands standard, which is probably where they'd be promoted to if they were promoted. So in this game, I'm going to go 1-0 to Worcester Raiders, the club that is still progressing onwards at the moment. Whereas Sporting Calcer versus Nantwich Town. When I saw Sporting Calcer up against Long Eaton United, the guy had the thickest Black Country accent I think I've come across in a while. So bearing in mind that my granddad has got a Black Country accent, and my mum was born and raised in the Black Country, you'd expect, me to have heard a fair few decent ones over time. But yeah, Sporting Calcer finished, I think it was bottom of it. Well, it wasn't bottom, but they were relegated from the Northern Premier League Division 1 West last season, having spent a couple of seasons at that level. It's not too bad. They were reached the fourth qualifying round of the FA Cup 2015-16. Some decent enough sort of teams. The women's team, I would argue, is even better than the men's, from what I'm aware of. Nantwich Town, very historic club in the Northern Premier League Division 1 West. And, we're talking deeply historic here. They've got, they won the FA Vase in 2005-06. They've had Kelvin Mellor as a player before if you're going back in that point. They've also reached the first round of the FA Cup on 3 different occasions. They have a stand called the Whitby Morrison Ice Cream Van stand. So what a name. They've also been in Northern Prem before. I think in a conference before as well. I just have a feeling that no. But the Northern Premier League, it was a decent, not even that long ago. Sporting Kosovo, I will go to shock a lot of people to win 1-0 in this game. Kidsgrove Athletic versus Abbey Holton United. You know what? We are going a bit slowly because we're already 2 hours in and we're only halfway through the FA Cup game. So we'll just go through the scores, and if there's anything I think worthwhile saying, I'll say it. But 2-0 to Kidsgrove Athletic against Abbey Holton United. I think 1-1 between Blackstones and Northampton Selby Rangers, and I'll go Blackstones to win the replay. Daventry Town versus Boston Town, I think will end 1-0 to Daventry. I think AFC Mansfield win big against Retford United in their return to the FA Cup, obviously getting promoted last season. 13-0 to AFC Mansfield. Skegness Town versus Retford, I've gone 0-0 here. So the other Retford team maybe to have a bit better luck in this one, and I think Skegness Town win replay. I'm going to Leicester Nirvana versus Long Eaton United. I don't know whether I should reveal what my score prediction will be, but I think I'm going to go 2-0 to Long Eaton United. I kind of have to commit now, I've said it. But yeah, hopefully it's a good match, no matter which way it goes. Just looking for a good game of football. Grantham Town is one of them truly historic teams, but when you think back to the early days of the FA Cup, and Grantham is always synonymous with it, isn't it? I've gone 5-1 to Grantham Town over Lincoln United, and a bit of a local rivalry of sorts, isn't it? Grantham should be playing at a much, much higher level than they are. Loughborough Students versus Eastwood, same with Eastwood, having formerly been in the Conference North before, The ground is a phenomenal standard, but clearly rotting in tier 9 at the moment. I've got Loughborough Students to win 6-1. You know, there's a difference between these two teams. There is a golfing class. Hucknall Town also, I think we're in the Conference North at 1 point, and playing up against Desborough Town. This might be a historic new low for Hucknall. I've gone 3-1 to Desborough Town. Woodbridge versus Town versus Heacham. I've got Heacham to win 3-0 in this one. And I know they didn't have a great season last time around, but maybe they can shock a few people this time. Wroxham versus Ipswich Wanderers. Ipswich Wanderers seem to be floating between that tier 9 and tier 8 gap. I've gone 0-0 and I've gone Wroxham to win and replay though. Ely City versus Marchtown United. I've gone 5-3 to Ely City. What a game I think that will be. Haverhill Rovers versus Halstead Town. Gone 4-2 to Haverhill. Ainsbury Rovers versus Fakenham Town. I've gone 3-1 to Ainsbury Rovers. God Manchester Rovers versus Newmarket Town. Another one of them very historic teams, isn't it? Newmarket. I'm just trying to think where. What am I thinking? Newmarket. I know they're in the Isthmian League at the moment, but they were 4 qualifying round of the FA Cup in 1992-93. Maybe not as historic as I thought, but I've gone for that one 1-0 to Manchester Rovers. Stowmarket Town versus St Neots Town, 3-2 to St Neots there. Dereham Town versus Walsham and Willows, I've gone 2-0 Walsham and Willows. Kirkley and Pakefield versus Little Oakley, I've gone 2-1 to Little Oakley. They're seemingly perennial overachievers, Little Oakley, in this in being where they are. Mulbarton Wanderers versus Lakenheath. I've gone 3-0 to Mulbarton. Lowestoft Town versus Cambridge City. Both of these two teams deeply historic, aren't they? Cambridge City, what a farcical state of affairs. But they ended up missing out due to Cambridge United essentially being elected instead. And then they tried to move to a new ground. Didn't really work. Laid them with loaded debt, and now they've sort of find themselves at tier 8 level. But I've gone 3-2 to Cambridge City in this one. Harleston Town versus Great Yarmouth Town. Went to Great Yarmouth Town's grounds, just took a quick snaps on the way in, and it's the oldest stand in the world for footballing purposes at Great Yarmouth Town. That I don't think that piece of trivia does anything. I think Harleston win 2-0. Brantham Athletic versus Soham Town Rangers. I've gone 2-0 to Soham. Cornard United versus Downham Town. I've gone for a 1-1 draw and Downham Town to win on a replay. Baldock Town versus Kempston Rovers. I've gone 2-0 to Baldock. Harefield United versus Bowers and Pitsea. I've gone 2-1 to Harefield United. North Greenford United versus Arlesey Town. 3-1 to North Greenford. London Lions versus Rayners Lane. I've gone 5-1 to the London Lions. Sawbridgeworth Town versus AFC Welling. 2-1 to AFC Welling. In their second season in the FA Cup. Buckhurst Hill versus Barking. And I think it'd be mental for me to not mention Barking, wouldn't it? Considering, well, the fact that they're now below Buckhurst Hill is phenomenal in itself. But they've reached the second round of the FA Cup before Barking. They're truly sort of, when you think of the Isthmian League, you normally think of Barking because it was part of that league for such a long time. But I've gone 1-0 to Buckhurst Hill to buck the trends. Like that one. Haringey Borough versus Sporting Bengal United. Both of these on a bit of a downwards trajectory at the moment. I've gone 2-0 to Haringey, which used to have a lot of fans attending because, when Spurs weren't at White Hart Lane, you used to get a lot of Spurs fans rocking up to the ground. So I don't know what's happened to them. Leverstock Green versus Walthamstow. 3-1 to Walthamstow, another quite historic club within the London area. Great Wakering Rovers versus Takeley. I've gone 4-1 to Wakering. Romford versus Barton Rovers. I've gone 4-0 to Barton Rovers. Cockfosters versus Potton United. I've gone 1-0 to Cockfosters. Stopfold to Basel versus Basildon United, 4-0 to the visitors Basildon. Hullbridge Sports versus Hadley, 2-0 to Hadley. Clapton Community versus Benfleet. I mean, it is worth mentioning that the farcical nature as it happened with Clapton seems that Clapton Community now inhabit the old Spotted Dog ground, that truly historic ground in East London, nestled amongst the terraces. Always, a rough ground to go to. And they're now owned by these people who like no to racism, sexism, homophobia, a right, left wing sort of leaning club. And both them and Benfleet were promoted last season. I've gone 2-1 to Clapton Community. Newport Pagnell Town versus Marlow. Marlow, I think, won the first ever FA Cup. So, yeah, truly historic club in that one. 2-1 to Newport Pagnell. Northleigh versus Amersham Town. 2-1 to Northleigh. Holy Port versus Wallingford and Cromarsh. 4-1 to Wallingford and Cromarsh. Roman Glass St George versus Haylen. 4-3 to Roman Glass St George. Swindon Supermarine versus Tuffley Rovers. Wouldn't Swindon Supermarine were like at one point in the Southern League Premier Division, and now I've just fallen off a cliff. I've gone 4-0 to Swindon Supermarine. Kidlington versus Larkhall Athletic, 2-1 to Larkhall. Burnham versus Slimbridge, I've gone 1 apiece, and I've gone for the replay to be won by Burnham. Malmesbury Victoria versus Long Levens, I've gone 2-0 to Long Levens. Abingdon United versus Risborough Rangers, welcome back Abingdon, and I've gone 2-0 to Risborough. Thatcham Town versus Cinderford Town, I've gone 1-0 to Thatcham. I've gone 2-1 to Beckenham Town in their game against Hawley Town. AFC Valdinians, who you may remember their ground from the fact that Brighton and Hove Albion used to play at the Withdean Stadium when they were back in League Two about 15 years ago now. I've gone Eastbourne Town over the visitors to win 4-0. Guernsey versus Crowborough Athletic. Guernsey are a club with a lot of aspirations at the moment. I've gone 3-2 to Guernsey, a very entertaining game on the island. Horsham YM, which has been known as Horsham YMCA. I don't know why I got rid of the CA. I've gone to Peacehaven and Telscombe. I've gone 1-0 to Horsham YM in that. Deal Town versus Sutton Athletic. Deal Town won the FA Vase. Was it 1999-2000? 1999-2000 year. But I've gone 3-1 to Deal Town against Sutton Athletic. Colburn versus Fisher, obviously the Phoenix club for the truly historic Fisher Athletic. I think Fisher win 3-0. Merstham versus Rains Park Vale. I've gone 2-1 to Merstham. Kennington versus Sheppey United. Well, Sheppey United recently had a very good run in the FA Cup. I think they even played against Walsall fairly recently. I've gone 3-3 though in this. And Kidlington, I'll go Sheppey United to win the replay. But yeah, an early stumbling block for Sheppey. Redhill versus Ashford United, gone 3-1 to Ashford. Hassocks versus Sevenoaks Town, I've gone Sevenoaks Town to win 1-0. Faversham Town versus Corinthian Casuals, gone 1-0 to Corinthian Casuals. Corinthian versus Lingfield, I've gone 4-0 to Corinthian. Epsom Newell, I've gone with versus Chipstead, I've gone 3-1. We'll go 3-1 to Epsom Newell. Staying Town versus Erith Town, I've gone Erith Town to win 5-1. Tadley Caliva versus Beamerton Heath Harlequins, I've gone Tadley Caliva to win 3-0. Portland United versus Sturminster Newton United, I've gone a 0-0 draw, and Sturminster Newton United to win on replay. Sherborne Town versus Baffins Milton Rovers, I've gone 3-0 Sherborne Town. Cowes Sports versus Hamble Club, 2-0 Hamble Club. East Cowes Victoria Athletic versus AFC Stoneham, 2-0 to Stoneham. Fleet Town versus Melksham Town, gone 3-0 to Melksham. Petersfield Town versus Fareham Town. It's like Fareham, Farnham, Farnborough. What the flip is going on in Hampshire, right? Gone 3-3 draw though in this one, and I've gone Fareham Town to win the replay. Gone Badshot to win 4-0 over Brockenhurst at home. Horndean versus Hartley Whitney. I've gone 2-2 draw Hartley Whitney to win the replay. Andover New Street versus Christchurch. Gone 2-0 to Christchurch. Bournemouth Poppies versus Downton. I've gone 2-2 draw and Downton to win the replay. I've also gone with a 2-2 draw between Buckland Athletic and Barnstable Town, with Barnstable Town to win the replay. Bovey Tracy, I think, will lose 3-0 against Exmouth Town. I think this might even be their debut FA Cup campaign for Bovey Tracy. Sidmouth Town versus Street, I've gone 4-0 Street. I've gone Willen Rovers to win 2-1 over Wellington. For Falmouth Town versus Bideford, I've got an exciting 4-all draw, and I think, though, the victor of a replay will be Falmouth. Saltash United versus Brixham. Brixham had a good run a couple of seasons back. A 1-all draw with Brixham to win as a replay. Another draw with a 3-all draw between Ivybridge Town versus Torpoint Athletic, with Torpoint to win the replay. Tavistock versus St Blasey to win 5-0 to the host Tavistock. Liskeard Athletic to lose 4-1 to Bridgewater United. I know they were promoted from the South West Peninsula last season, but it's a difficult step up. And for the Sunday games, Hallam versus Earlham. Hallam with reputedly the oldest ground in the world at Sandygate. On a 3-all draw, but Earlham to win the replay when they take them back home. Littlehampton Town versus Eastbourne United on 4-0 to Littlehampton. I think Wick will beat Camberley Town 3-0. And Little Common to beat Haywards Heath Town 1-0. I know I just rushed through them at the end, but I was getting a bit tired, my voice is going a bit, and I need it for tonight's live watch along. But please do subscribe if you're new around here, and thank you so much if you stuck around throughout that video, because it took a long one and it was a lot of me rambling, hence the new name. Now you get it. But yeah, hopefully catch you for some action tonight. If not, I've got some shorts probably for Long Eaton United and of other clubs I mentioned today already on the channel, but hopefully from Long Eaton on the weekend. And then hopefully I'll be able to do a non-league show Tuesday, Wednesday time. I'll have to see. I'll try to get it out by Tuesday, but with the FA Cup bumper edition, I'm not quite too sure. I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye for now.